Good afternoon. All right, it's nice to see everyone. Welcome to Teachers College. I'm Janice Robinson, Vice President for Diversity and Community Affairs, and welcome to a really important and stirring program, Choices and Chances, School Policies and Practices, and the Experience of Exclusion. We have, as you can see, a terrific panel, and we really look forward to it, and we expect a really stirring conversation and participation from everyone. So I'm going to turn the program over to Professor Lalitha Vasudevan, and she will do the introductions.
What I wanted to do is I wanted to take a few minutes to just give you a sense of what we're trying to do here together, what we hope to share with you, but what we also hope that you will share with us in the spirit of true dialogic engagement here, not only at Teachers College, but as community members locally and more globally. Like Janice said, my name is Lalitha Vasudevan, and before I give you a little bit more of an intro of who I am other than what's in the program, I wanted to give you also a format of what we're going to be doing this afternoon. Each of us is going to talk for a few minutes about what connection we have to the topic of the panel. And as you see, the topic is called Choices and Chances, School Policies and Practices, and the Experience of Exclusion. And the idea of experience is really important here because so often we have words like mass incarceration and juvenile justice and school to prison pipeline that get used and slapped onto a variety of things, but so often we presume the meaning of them. And I think this idea of really focusing on experience is really what we're going to try to do here together, to tease out, to offer some texture about notions of experience, not only inside school, but outside of school, and really thinking about the role school might play, can play, has played in helping us think about, prevent, and reimagine narratives of exclusion here in this country, and we'll see how far we get. Following the brief intros, I'm going to pose a few general questions to my colleagues here, and we're going to talk for maybe the first part of this afternoon's conversation amongst ourselves. I'm going to encourage them to pose questions to one another, but we also really want your questions to be part of this conversation. And so following that first part, we're going to open it up for what I'm hoping are a lot of really good questions and thoughts and reflections from all of you. We do have folks in the Twitter sphere joining us using the hashtag TC_choices. So if those of you who tweet, feel free to live tweet as well. And if you see a question that people are throwing out, please, once we open it up, bring in some of their questions as well. Yeah? Okay, so why am I here? I'm here because Jolene emailed me and said, Lalitha, would you be interested in moderating a panel about school exclusion and the experiences of exclusion in education? And she hadn't really gotten to who was on the panel yet. She just sort of got that far. And I was instantly in agreement. Absolutely, I would be honored to be part of this panel. And I think one reason that I might have been invited to moderate is that about 17 and a half years ago, I started teaching at an alternative education program for young people who were incarcerated and on probation. And it was interesting because I was a young person myself, and it was absurd to me, now that I think about it, that I was hired to be a teacher of people who were my age. But naivete sometimes works in our favor. And so what happened to me was my understanding of education was fused with the narratives of young people for whom school had not been a successful experience. And so for the last 18 years, I have stayed in my research, in my teaching, in my way of being in the world, connected to the narratives, the lives, and the identities of young people who have been court involved in a variety of ways. And it's with them and from them that I think I really understand experiences of education differently, and thinking about what we might do, not only as individuals, but as multiple communities intersecting together. And to be having this conversation here at Teachers College feels important, it feels intentional, and it feels hopefully like a catalyst for new growth and new ideas to come out of today. So that's a little bit about why I'm connected to this work, and I'll talk more as we talk together as well. But I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Wilson, to continue the introduction.
Like many people, from my own personal experiences of family and friends around disengagement with schools, and my first endeavor sort of professionally was ironically working in doing evaluations in juvenile justice facilities, examining issues around rights, kids' rights in prisons. So largely focused on education rights, and through that process ended up talking to a lot of kids, talking to them about their experiences around school, and came to find that there were a great deal of similarities in their stories. And these stories were all sort of very disturbing to me and not sort of striking in the way like I didn't know these things happened, because I knew well these things happened. But striking to me in the sense that so many kids in this situation, in these places, had, you know, experiences of disengagement, the same kinds of experiences of disengagement in school, the same sorts of experiences of exclusion, the same sorts of experiences around labeling. And it got me interested in really examining how is it that schools themselves are facilitating kids' involvement in the criminal justice system, essentially. Which led me here to start the Teachers College School to Prison Pipeline Project, focused on that issue. And I just used the little easy word that we throw around this school to prison pipeline thing, but which I'm very thankful to Dan Lowson for coining that, because it's sort of this easy visual thing that people can grab onto and understand sort of the gravity of the issue. But really my hope is to, in examining what that actually means, find ways for people in our position to help teachers, help schools, help administrators, help policy people in the sort of policy world understand how it is we are sort of disciplining and punishing and warehousing our kids into prisons, and how it is we might endeavor to change that, to disrupt that. So that's my reason for being here. So I'll move on to Joseph and let him introduce himself.
First, I want to acknowledge my friends from Mott High School here in Harlem. Back there, y'all wave. I'm going to be working with them and doing some work at that school. And I went and picked them up today. And it's interesting because, you know, I'm a Southern boy, and I always heard that New Yorkers walk fast. But it took us a really long time to get like a block away because of these New Yorkers right over here. So I apologize, Doc, for being late, because it was their fault. Why am I here? First, I would say that I'm here because God is amazing. And to understand that, my life, I'm here because when I was in first and second grade, I was that kid that we all know that has the bright eyes, that comes in school every day with the smile on his face, eager to learn, rapping his ABCs, singing, dancing. And by the time I was in third grade, the teacher because we moved from project to project and I went to a school, so I was first considered gifted until third grade, and then I was placed in special education because of those same gifts. And I was made to think that those gifts were curses. And my life spiraled out of control from there, you know, they say they build prisons based on third grade reading scores, and but they also do it based on third grade behavior. And that behavior is something that I exhibited when I was being mislabeled and mistreated, and I spiraled out of control and went on to middle school, where I then was being put in and out of school, get kicked in out of school, and then on to juvenile detention, where I was a frequent visitor of. And then by my junior year, I dropped out of school and ran the streets, and then found myself in jail. And so why I am here is because I know what it's like to be a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old, or on down, and to feel like you're in this abusive relationship with school, and you don't like it, and it doesn't like you. And you are mad at the world, and you don't have anyone who can you turn to, because you can't turn to the people who you feel like you're being excluded by. And so that journey that I've been on, and pulling myself along with friends and help of friends, is why I'm here. And I have to say this. When I was 17 and I was in jail, one day they brought in a book. And, you know, I hadn't read a whole lot of books. I did read the Bible about a kid whose name was Joseph, and he was 17 years old, and he was in jail. And I was like, wow, that's me. Like, I'm 17, you know, I'm in jail, and my name is Joseph, and I dream also. But there was another book that they put across our desk, and it was called Race Matters. And it was Dr. Cornel West's book. And so I read that book, and if any of you all know anything about Oklahoma, you got to know, you know, that race matters and should matter in Oklahoma, but you're not very highly considered oftentimes. And so I read his book, and so I'm just honored to be here with him today, sitting, because I read his book, and then I would see him in the state of black unions all these years on panels, and now I'm sitting beside him, and he's a mentor of mine. So, you know, so I just feel honored. So I'm here because I want to really engage in this conversation and feel like I could give a ground level perspective on it.
Indeed, I want to begin by just saluting Vice President Janice Robinson for her leadership and her work here. And similarly so for Director Jolene Lane, who will be speaking at the very end of this program. But to be on the panel with Professor Lalitha Vasudevan and Professor Michael Wilson and my very, very dear brother Joseph Mathews, I'm here in part because Brother Joseph asked me to come. I was blessed to have him in my class the last semester, of course, on the tragic, the comic, and the political, where he gave a magnificent reading of Franz Kafka's great short story, The Metamorphosis. You might recall that first line. Gregor Samson woke up and found himself transformed into a huge foul vermin. And he said, oh, lo and behold, to be young and black and brown and poor white sometimes leads you to feel as if you are a huge foul vermin. So he invited Kafka to the hood. And it was a magnificent reading, and I got a chance to meet him. He and I are on our way to see Bell Hooks. You all know the great Bell Hooks. There's an institute for Bell Hooks critical studies at Berea College in Kentucky. So we're on our way tomorrow together to be a part of that dialogue with Bell Hooks. But it's just a blessing for me to have a partnership and a brothership and a comradeship with a young brother who's so gifted and so committed, and at the same time so open to a variety of different perspectives. So the teachers here, the administrative officers here, it makes a difference. I fundamentally believe that I am who I am because somebody loved me, somebody cared for me, somebody targeted me. I was booted out of third grade in Sacramento, California. No school would take me in the whole city. I brought tears to my mother's eyes. My father believed in punishment that we won't go into at the moment. It would be against the law today, but he did it out of love. And so, which meant that if that same criteria were to apply in the 1960s, with that third grade behavior, I was headed for jail rather than Yale. And it meant that it reinforced what I learned in Shiloh Baptist Church and what I learned in the West family, which is each young person is precious, priceless, no matter what color, no matter what civilization or sexual orientation. And we're living in a society where too many of our precious and priceless young people are socially neglected, economically abandoned, under intense police surveillance, and often are treated as if they are disposable or superfluous, that they don't count, that they don't matter. And that makes my blood boil because it's wrong, it's immoral, and it's unjust. We use all of our scholarly insight, but also our moral courage, and I would also say spiritual and political courage, to change it. I've taught in prisons for 30 years now, and I've been to jail at least 15 times, arrested against stop and frisk policies in New York City, against wars, be it Iraq, against drones dropping bombs on innocent children in Somalia and Yemen. They are just as precious as any other children anywhere. And in those jails, we have time for dialogue. Sometimes a lot of time for dialogue. And I learn and I listen, then I'm released, unlike so many, and return to Union Theological Seminary across the street from this distinguished institution, Columbia University Teachers College.
Just in those introductions, I think we have accomplished what Emerson talked about when he said, you know, truly speaking, it's not instruction but provocation that I seek. And so there's something really important about putting provocation into the world, and if we think about what the provocation was for all of us coming together, and another piece of it, Joseph was very modest. He didn't just read books, but he has written at least 3, is that right, Joseph? 4 books. And I'm pointing out this one. I can embarrass him, see that? But it's a good kind of embarrassment, because the provocations that he is putting out, and this is sort of a question that grows out of what you were saying, comes in part from what you had said in a conversation we had when we first met. And Joseph said, you know, I have been through these experiences and I find myself here, but that wasn't enough. I needed to do something, not just to document, but to reach back, to not, it wasn't giving back, but it was being back, and it was recalling and remembering in this really lovely and important way what it meant to be a young man navigating these really cathected terrains of institutionalization. And so Michael has brought up the phrase school to prison pipeline, and recently, you know, more and more people are using this even more lovely phrase, cradle to prison pipeline, which just, it churns my stomach, and yet you hear about these third grade moments, these kindergarten moments, these nursery school moments of disciplining the body. And I wanted each of you to offer, if you could, when we think about cradle to adulthood, let's take prison out of it for a moment. Given some of the ideas that are on the table, can you think of a critical moment in that lifetime of a person, either in your lifetime or the lifetime of someone else, that you think was a critical moment, a pivotal moment, a path-changing moment that interrupts? And I appreciate you bringing up the word interrupt.
When you say a critical moment, I think about the ways that, you know, we use this term school to prison pipeline. We're not talking about sort of prison, but we're sort of talking about the development or progression that occurs among young people who are interacting in school with adults and the school system. And I think that what we see is not necessarily one critical event, but something that would be described as, I don't know, I could describe as a cascade of effects or a feedback loop. It's almost as if, you know, in our, you know, kids are warehoused, and I use that term intentionally, warehoused into these spaces, and then, you know, they enter this path for various reasons. It could be sort of acting out in a way that, in third grade, in a way that you know, the teacher finds problematic, or if the teacher feels is disruptive to the classroom, and the response to that is then either to position that kid as bad, or to exclude that kid from the room, or to refer that kid to be labeled for that behavior. And then that response, that negative response, sort of furthers and leads to more negative responses and interactions. So you're positioning, in response to this issue you have, it's no longer we need to teach, or we need to try to understand, well, where's this coming from, or we don't reflect on our own practice in terms of trying to understand, well, is there some sort of cultural misunderstanding on the part of the teacher? Rather, we say, we're going to punish. And that punishment then produces more negative outcomes. It produces Joseph suddenly feeling as though, well, wait, I don't fit here. They're telling me there's something wrong with me. It ends up with Joseph being placed in a classroom for, you know, students with disabilities, where the expectations, the academic expectations, aren't as high. And then further acting out because, you know, I'm in a classroom with low expectations, unengaging curriculum, and I am, you know, part of this sort of peer effect of a bunch of kids who have been told, well, you're not good. There's something wrong with you. You're not normal, which produces then more negative events, which we then respond to with more punishment and more exclusion. So when I say this sort of, it's an issue of sort of this cascade of effects, it's like, or this feedback loop, which I haven't decided whether it's a positive or negative feedback loop. That's a whole nother discussion, but it's more, it's every single event taken together dehumanizes.
The pivotal point for me, there's two moments. The one was when I was put into that special ed classroom in third grade. Just the loneliness that I felt, and the brokenness. I mean, oftentimes we look at the policy aspect of these kids being placed in special ed, but look at the spiritual and the emotional trauma that they experience, especially when they're being removed out of regular ed classroom and placed into special education. Like, I cried like a baby when they put me in, and there was no one coming to rescue me. And that was the loneliest feeling in the world, to know that you're not this person that they have painted you out to be, but no one's coming to your rescue. And so the fighting was a way of me crying out, like, please come save me, please come save me, and no one ever came. The second pivotal moment for me was actually in 5th grade, because we lived in this project, and I had another friend that I walked with, and we were like, and this is the other thing, oftentimes people think of urban schools failing kids. Well, I didn't go to urban schools, I went to suburban schools. My mom found a project in the suburbs, and so I was like the only black kid. Me and this other kid, we were like the only two black kids in this project. And every day we would walk home, and this police officer would pull me and him over. They would stop and frisk us. See, stop and frisk was invented in Oklahoma. And they would stop us and pat us down, and we would go on our way. And it would upset me, but there was one particular moment, one particular day that I was walking, and the police stopped me and pat me down, and I looked across the street, and I saw my teacher watching him pat me down. And she watched, and he patted me down, and I went on my way. And I went home, and I was so hurt because she knows that I'm not this person that he's making me out to be. And she expects me to open up to her and to be this open book and pour my heart out. And she wants me to stand up and, you know, and speak up in class. But I'm not going to do that anymore because you didn't even have the courage to stand up and speak up for me when I was being criminalized. And so that was a very pivotal moment in my life, because that is when I said, I do not trust you, because you can't teach people whom you don't trust. And the only way that you can trust them is if they know that you're on their side, that you will stand up for them. And she neglected to stand up for me when I was being criminalized. And so where do I turn? And so my spirits was really broken about education and about my humanity, because everywhere I turned, I was being treated, me and my friends were being treated like we were not even humans. And, you know, we didn't have anywhere to go. And so I kind of withdrew even more in 5th grade. And I think that was a pivotal moment for me, because that led to the suspensions from school, more suspensions from school.
For me, I begin with the interplay between the individual and the institutional practices, or the interplay between existential issues. What kind of person are you going to be? What kind of self-confidence do you have? What kind of self-respect do you have? And then the issue of the nation state. What kind of policies? What kind of resources are available in the schools? You see? Why is it that the police are deployed excessively in poor communities? Why is the war against drugs primarily a war against poor people who use drugs, as opposed to the well-to-do brothers and sisters who fly high in the friendly skies at the same level of percentage as the poor, but rarely go to jail? And we won't even talk about executives on Wall Street who engage in explicit criminal behavior and not one goes to jail. That's arbitrary rule of law. It's wrong, it's unjust. In my own case, in stark contrast to my dear brother Joseph, that when I was doing the wrong thing and acting up, because I got kicked out of school for very good reasons, and I won't go into the details, but I'm glad somebody was praying for me. But I did call for help, and someone came. Mom loved me, Dad loved me, my brother loved me, Reverend Willie P. Cook loved me, Deacon Hinton loved me, my vacation Bible school teacher loved me, Sarah Ray. She responded to my call for help, because I grew up in a neighborhood. It was chocolate, it was black, but it was not a hood. In my black neighborhood, Donny Hathaway called it a ghetto. There was a lot of love in that neighborhood, a lot of care in that neighborhood. People reached out. We hear little Ronnie's acting up. We're going to have to put our arms around that little Negro and keep track of that little Negro. And I'll never forget it. I carry it with me every day of my life, because I didn't deserve that kind of love, but I received it. And it turned me around. But I began with a sense of self-confidence, self-respect, and trying to do the right thing. And then I had my critical analysis. Why is it so that when the issues of distribution of goods and services, that these folk on this side of town receive so much less than those on the other side of town? Not just color, even though it's disproportionately chocolate, black and brown, and red. Red folk don't have to be in the room for us to be concerned about their children. But also poor white and working class white. So I had to raise a question. I need a critical analysis that equips me to understand why there is this relative lack of love, care, concern, nourishing on this side of town as opposed to the other side of town. And I started working with the Black Panther Party in their breakfast program. I'm a Christian, so I couldn't join the party. They were atheistic. They have their own views on things. But I love their concern about poor children. I became part of their prison program, worked with their breakfast program in the mornings. That was in 1970 through 1973 when I was a student at Harvard College. So that it was a matter of becoming active in trying to make a difference critically, politically, morally, spiritually. And then, of course, I joined a church that was prophetic. That is to say, the pastor was not a CEO. We had pastors in those days who cared, who took a risk, who tried to tell the truth, who bore witness, and some of them were willing to die because they had brothers like Malcolm X on the Muslim side of things who was willing to tell the truth and live and die. Or you had Martin King, a Fannie Lou Hamer, a Ella Baker. But that was the 60s and the 70s. I see my dear sister smiling. She knows what I'm talking about. Oh, that was a moment when we had models of not just abstract folk on television talking, but you had folk on the ground willing to live and die because they had been so loved that they were willing to love. And sometimes that means you get in a lot of trouble.
Across your responses, there were different words that moved me and sort of captivated me. And I wanted to put them back out there to you to invite you to give another layer, if you will. And among the words that were sort of really affecting me were words like dehumanizing, criminalization, trauma, lonely, lack of trust, and then that pesky word love. You know, it's a lovely word, and yet it seems wholly missing from so much of what we see happening in our institutions. So again, I invite you to push those words a little bit, to help us think about in these institutions, and let's stay there for a minute. Institutions like schools, institutions in the broadest sense like neighborhoods, institutions like communities, institutions like universities. Where are these words at play? You don't have to obviously take up all of them, but the words like both dehumanizing and humanity, like criminalization, trauma, trust, loneliness, and love.
I often think, and I'm going to, given my limitations due to my age, I actually am going to sort of ask you to respond to my wonderings about the possibility of increasing disconnect of communities, and bureaucracies replacing communities, and sort of this idea of can a bureaucracy love or trust? Or are bureaucracies simply good for maintaining order through things like, so I take it back to thinking about schools. Bureaucracies are particularly good at surveying, for example, and setting up and organizing to survey children's bodies in schools, and to create sort of this carceral state where school is concerned with, you know, order and making sure the halls are clear and all the doors are locked except for the one up front where the school resource officer is, who is armed and prepared to deal with any problems coming from outside or inside the school. And then it seems like this bureaucracy sets up this system which must then rely on the extraordinary efforts of individuals who can find the capacity to love and care for kids in spite of their disconnect and in spite of their role as the enforcer of bureaucratic order. So, I mean, I think that's a great question. I don't know if that's at all a response to it, but I think it's more of a question, a wondering that I would pose to the other panel, because to the other panel members, because it seems to me that what we have in place of communities and communities that are capable of love and trust and care through knowing, you know, through families and kids and neighbors and so forth, communities knowing each other is this bureaucracy that is somewhat incapable of replicating that.
Yeah, I want to say a quick word about bureaucracies, and I appreciate both the comment and the question, no, brother, that I think bureaucracies are predicated on certain kind of policies which presuppose certain kind of priorities that are based on certain visions. So anytime I talk about love, it's always tied to justice. Brother Martin King used to say justice is what love looks like in public. Now, it's very interesting that we don't like to talk about justice these days. It's all about growth, growth, growth. Why? Because it's dominated by the rule of money, 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 big money, stock market, big banks, big corporations. Their priorities dominate the whole society, with reverberations across every sphere. So it's all about money, money, money. A Wu-Tang Clan, cream. Cash rules everything around me. It doesn't have to rule me, because Wu-Tang comes out of the same tradition that Martin does. They prophetic. But they could see it's all about money. And in such a context, it doesn't leave room for talk about love or justice, because love or justice are non-market values. In a market-driven society that's all about buying and selling, and everything's up for sale, everybody's up for sale, including leaders, including politicians, sometimes professors. It's true, especially in economic departments. Big money. So that issues of integrity, love, justice pushed to the margins. And who pays the cost? The relatively unloved and those who are treated unjustly. And that's what we've seen in the last 35, 40 years or so. In the capitalist society, financialization of the capitalist society, 42% of all the profits now go to banks. It used to go to corporations that produce cars and things. Now it goes to banks that make deals with big money and speculation and casino-like speculation, you see. So it's a different moment that we're growing up. And all we do is look in television. Our young people, what do they see? The values that they see, the priorities that they see are money, 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 and obsession with the 11th commandment. Thou shalt not get caught. Because if your culture more and more is a matter of chasing dollars, then the end is getting over by any means. What's the front page of the New York Times today? Scandal, scandal. What's the business page look like every day? Scandal, scandal, scandal. Why? Because the level of criminality and immorality escalates if it's just about getting over. And that's the difference between a ghetto and a hood. Because when I was growing up in ghetto, it wasn't just about getting over. It was about trying to be of service to somebody before you die. It's trying to help somebody. To be great was to be of service. Today, to be great is big money. The difference between Curtis Mayfield and Jay-Z. Both of them geniuses. Curtis showed up at the Black Panther Party rally with his guitar. His agent said, "You are crazy." He said, "No." Or John Coltrane would show up at Malcolm X speeches on 125th Street. His agent said, "John Coltrane, you lose your mind." He said, "No, I want to know what's going on." And I love Jay-Z. He's a lyrical genius, but there's not a lot of political courage operating. Because it's making money. His agents are telling him what to do. And Lupe Fiasco, a little different. He's closer to Curtis. Jill Scott, a little different. than Beyonce. And people say, oh, you putting them down. I'm not putting them down. It's a cultural difference in terms of what it means to be a highly visible person when you're concerned with justice, as opposed to our culture, where people are concerned with money. And if we make a shift, and young folk are going to have to make this shift before the whole planet goes under, because the money-driven culture is leading toward ecological catastrophe, is leading toward wealth inequality, is leading toward increasing poverty, prison-industrial complex, new Jim Crow. How long do we think any society can sustain that level of lack of justice? Sooner or later, chickens come home to roost. You're going to reap what you sow. It doesn't last forever. That's the tradition that produces, you know, the Du Boises and Martin Kings and Malcolm X's and others. And it's not their individual genius, it's the tradition that they come out of that we're talking about. And the same is true in terms of our cultural artists, the Curtis Mayfields and Nina Simone's, who's singing tonight. Blue Note, D.D. Bridgewater. She's singing about justice, not just about making money. It's a different sensibility. So that's an effort to respond to your question, my brother, in terms of whether bureaucracies can, if they can be pushed in a certain kind of way. Absolutely. Look at Finland. They work it out with their bureaucracies. How come? 3% poverty among their children. Every child gets a free meal. Each classroom, 14 folk, 2 students in every classroom. They take hardly any test at all. In America, rich kids get taught, poor kids get tested. Different sensibility, different set of priorities.
Is school a place then where it is a bureaucratic institution? But is it a place that can be interrupted? And by that I mean, you all have put on the table not just practices and policies, but you've put on the table people. You've named people, individuals, but you've also named categories of people. The teachers, counselors, priests, family members, after-school program coordinators, nurses. The school is people. Is it a place that can be interrupted? And where does it need to be interrupted?
It can be interrupted and it can be corrupted at the same time.
That's nice.
As you all know, I give examples. I was teaching in Chicago, and I was teaching at O.W. Holmes in South Chicago. And I let my 3rd grade kids out one day, and the police jumped out of the car with billy clubs because they didn't want the kids leaving out this side of the building. And they all ran to the other side, and so I was pissed. And I went over, because I experienced this when I was a kid, and so I went around the building to find out what was going on. And by the time I got over there, they're slamming one of my 3rd graders on a car and putting him in handcuffs because they were throwing rocks at each other. And so we had all of my students upset, our 8th graders, you know, who were pretty big, they were ready to fight. And I had to diffuse the situation, and the kids wouldn't leave when the police were hollering at them, and I told them to go home, you know, we're going to work this out. But I also talked to the police officer and told them that, one, you're illegal on so many, you haven't contacted the school, you haven't contacted this kid's parents, and they were throwing rocks, and he's on school property, and you can't put this kid in a police car and take him to jail. But they did it anyway. But so as I'm having this argument or this debate, lively debate with the police officers, my principal comes up and, you know, she assesses the situation, and I don't know, I think she may have been she was either from, I think she was from New England, I think, and she was new to Chicago. And so long story short, I come back the next week, and I get called to the office. I was let go. I was informed that I was being let go, because we always talk about social justice and how we want social justice, but like Dr. West was saying, there's a price to pay. And sometimes when you stand up, like, it's one thing to talk about social justice, but what happens when you have to stand up and be an advocate against your peers and your coworkers when you see them mistreating your children? Because oftentimes we will remain silent when we see that. And how can we continue this authenticity with our kids when they know that we're seeing them being mistreated and we remain silent? Do we really think that we're going to get the best and the most out of them? No, they're going to shut down, and they're not going to respect you because you don't respect them. And I was let go, but I left, you know, and they said I was being disruptive, and she said that we need the police on our side. And I said I know that. I'm not against police officers, but I am against them racially profiling and brutalizing our children. And so I paid a price, but I walked away knowing that I did the right thing. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and although I was unemployed, I was still full of, one, love. I showed the kids that I loved them and that I respected them. And I walked away with my dignity, unlike many others who remain silent, oftentimes in the face of these injustices that they see. And so I think that, as Dr. West was saying, and as you're asking, yes, school can be interrupted, but it has to be done from those willing to look at education as being a form of liberation and not just continuing the oppression. Because educators are supposed to be liberators. And I think that we have, unfortunately, because we talking about market, I think that we have a lot of educators who are going into education for the wrong reasons, for the money or for a stopping place until they can get into TC or get into policy in DC, and it's not for the right reasons. And so they're not there to be advocates for our children. And so I think that those of us who care and who love our children and who love justice and want to see it, I think we have to be the ones, the interrupters of that, because I think that right now there's a dangerous mix of the two.
It touches on both what Michael was saying about, the sort of the escalation of a moment into an event, into a larger narrative, that now you continue to carry with you, something as simple as throwing rocks. But also the tension between justice and growth, and I think that the sort of larger corporatization that I think we have been implying seems to even be playing out in that example, right? So what is the motivation for holding a third grader, which I'm still, trying to wrap my head around because I know it happens, arresting a third grader for throwing rocks, and how is that connected to, and I think, maybe we can talk about this, how is that connected to this larger sort of landscape of a focus on growth over justice, a dehumanization, a lack of love in institutional policies and practices, and almost like the sort of embeddedness of exclusion as a policy of schooling. And so I'm appreciating your story, Joseph.
Your characterization of exclusion being embedded in schools made me think of, one of the classes a few weeks ago spent a lot of time talking about sort of this parallel system within education from the time of common schooling, where common schools, or the idea of the common school for all, was instituted, then quickly retreated from, and spaces for kids who were deemed as special or different immigrant children were created. Spaces for kids who were perceived as delinquent were created at that same time. These sort of special and delinquent parallel school systems and classes. And those spaces were occupied by kids that look a lot like look like the kids who occupy those spaces today. So I do think that exclusion is embedded in the fabric of education. It's the way way schools have been organized from the start of the sort of universal schooling movement, is to create a space for kids who were different to be placed elsewhere. And so I think that adds another layer of difficulty to disrupting this process. As Joseph said, it takes, again, these sort of extraordinary efforts by extraordinary people who are willing to put their job on the line. I know anyone who has been in one of my classes has at some point heard me say that if you go home every weekend and you feel like your job is safe, you're not doing your job as a teacher. And it's unfortunate that it comes to that, but I think the context within which education happens for many kids requires that of teachers. And it's certainly something that happens. It's something that, as Joseph just explained, it's something that happens at multiple levels. It's not just teachers, it's administrators who are aware of the context of education and the exclusionary context of education, recognizing that and pushing back against policies, district level policies that make no sense for individual kids, and thinking about things like growth and development and understanding, and how choosing to have dialogue and talk to kids will have sort of different ramifications than just pushing a kid out. And we hope that those ramifications will be certainly more positive. So I think that occurs at all levels and can occur at all levels. And I think that Joseph raises an important point of the issue of who is in education and why are they in education. But moreover, I think we need to spend more time sort of raising awareness of this issue in the sense that Dr. West was sort of the broad political, socio-political sense, the understandings of the way that this educational bureaucracy works. I don't think that the majority of teachers have malintent. I think many teachers are unaware of what this system looks like, and they're unaware of how they contribute to it every time that they, within the context of accountability, are thinking, this kid is disrupting my lesson. I need to get through this curriculum so that these kids are prepared for this test. And so I'm going to refer you out, or I'm going to keep documentation so that I can get you suspended and removed. That is part of this process also. And so getting teachers to understand that, to understand how those small decisions contribute to the problem is also important. So I think it's very much on us, on people in our position, to engage in this discussion, to be consistently engaged in this discussion and in action around this issue.
Brother Wilson, Professor Wilson, in terms of saluting extraordinary teachers who have made a fundamental difference. And I know that's true for my life. Even in the context that required fundamental change and reform. The great John Dewey, of course, of this grand institution, talked about a democratic model for education, very different than a market-driven model for education. The democratic model is about producing human beings who care about public interest, common good, what it means to be a citizen. A market model is gaining skills in order to be a consumer, to fit into some labor force with very little stress on critical reflection. It's a matter of being adjusted to injustice and more adapted to indifference to other people's suffering as long as you're doing well individually. To be a citizen in a democracy means you care deeply for other people's children. That's why you're willing to pay taxes so that other people's children receive a high-quality education, just not your children going to some private school. In a market model, it's more and more just concerned about your kids. The democratic model, very different. And not John Dewey, of course, been dead since June 1952. but the legacy still goes on in a very important way. But think about this now, Chicago. I was just part of a strike in Chicago. I almost went to jail again. 684 schools, but Sister Karen Lewis, who was our dear leader of the union, she's a black sister, she's brilliant, she's courageous. 684 schools, 202 nurses for 684 schools. 1 out of 4 of those schools have arts programs. So what does it mean to be a poor child with bullets and drugs on the corner? Your mother overworked and underpaid, trying to love you to death, but still trying to put food on the table. Your father there at his best, drifting at his worst. You got to go through mental detectives to get through the schools. Then you get into schools, and you can't even learn how to play an instrument. And we wonder why the young folk can't play like Lakeside, or watch 103rd Street Rhythm Band, or Duke Ellington's orchestra. They got to sample and use technology to generate their sound because they can't play the instruments. And this is especially true for black people, because music has always been the special means by which a people taught to hate themselves, to be black in a white supremacist civilization. Music has been the fundamental means by which we can get some distance from our pain and be free enough to say what is deeply in our souls. And if you generate a school system that downplays the use of imagination and intelligence in the arts, that's a vicious attack. I call it soul murder for people who used to be soulful, but more and more are American. And by American, what I mean at its worst, the land of smartness and dollars. That's the language of the great W.B. Du Bois and souls of black folk. A land of smartness and dollars. So the best thing you could be is smart. What does smart mean? Wise? No. Compassionate? No. Smart for what? Money. For manipulation. Always a sign of underdeveloped male, which is the model more and more for young people. Then we wonder why our young brothers walking around acting big and bad, but just want a little tender love and care, but don't know how to do it. Because they don't know what trial tenderness is, and Otis Redding is just say my name, say my name, say my name. You can't make it through life just getting folks to say your name, say your name, say your name. That's spiritual malnutrition. Sooner or later you discover that. You need a little tenderness, but learn how to be tender. You need a little gentleness, learn how to be gentle. You need a little kindness, learn how to be kind. But you can't be kind and gentle and tender unless you're mature, unless you believe in yourself, just you have confidence in yourself. You can pose and posture like you're big and bad. This is very important because you can't have a community without those kinds of values to generate trust so you have relationships that last and endure and make life worth living rather than just fighting over money and going to a funeral every 6 weeks because people don't care about you. What does it say? 58% of young black brothers between 18 and 26 say they do not have a best friend upon whom they can rely. Can you imagine what it's like to be a brilliant young brother? In this case, I'm just talking about the brothers, but I don't want to be patriarchal because the sisters have their own challenges. And you don't have a best friend upon whom you can rely? And you ask her, who will die for you? Ask young people these days, who will die for you? When they asked me in that 1969, we have a list of 100 folk. Huey Newton, Bobby Steele, Fannie Lou Hammond. We go on Martin King, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali. Long list. Richard Pryor, on a good day. He's a genius. He's a genius now. You ask young folk, who will die for you? Mama. Who else? Tupac, no, he got shot. Biggie got shot. That's a serious question. Of course, there'll be some others too, fathers and uncles in various cases. But that's just a sign of the decline of caring and nurturing, especially for young people, and especially for poor young people, that feeds into the challenge for our teachers and administrators and so forth. And yet we got the privatizers of education who just salivating to make big money and profit on that money in the public education system, and the power grab and the land grabbing that's taking place in our cities, here in Harlem, Southside Chicago, Philadelphia, and so forth and so on, you see. And these, I think, are the kind of crucial issues, and this is what, of course, me and Brother Joseph Mathews wrestle with each and every time we get together. Because we're trying to keep alive a tradition of carrying you all doing the same thing. Even though it's the first time I met you all, it's a blessing to meet you. But you all trying to do the same thing here at its best at Columbia University Teachers College, that's right. Indeed. We cutting against the grain, we got to be honest about that. And we at the moment are being defeated. We're losing. Too many precious young folk. Every day. Every day. You all know that. That's why we're here.
I wanted to piggyback on what Dr. West just said about the land grab. I think it's real important that we unpack this new, and I don't know how new it is, but I know in D.C., they shut down 23 schools 4 years ago, and then they're shutting down 20 this coming up year. But 4 years ago, when they shut down the 23 schools, 3,000 kids in D.C. dropped out of school as a result. The Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, their incarceration rate, that's the juvenile jail. Their incarceration rate went up 33% that summer. Because we're displacing, and that's the violence that we see in Chicago. Oftentimes, you know, I was teaching there, you know, when you shut a school down, the kids are going to say, man, I'm not going to, you know, they try to send the kids across town into a rival neighborhood. I'm not going to that school so I can get killed, Mr. Mathews. Nah, man. I mean, I love school, but I love living better. And so we look at that, and I think that speaks to this land grab, like who is being affected by this market-driven society that we're living in. And at the end of it, we have kids. They're being affected. Lives are being, you know, even with this whole charter school, shut down public school, because all public schools are bad, even the ones out in the suburbs, supposedly. And we shut them down and turn them into charter schools the next year. And then we displace kids and we displace families. You know, and then kids are dropping out because they don't want to get dispersed. And now families can't even walk their kids to school in can't even walk their kids to school in their own neighborhood. And I think that's a problem that we're having in our education system. And it's contributing to the dropout rates, exclusion, the criminalization of our kids, because, you know, when oftentimes and this is the thing, are the kids dropping out or are they being pushed out? Because I felt like I was being pushed out of school. You know, I was being intellectually, artistically, culturally abused. And oftentimes that's what kids feel. And if you're going to school in a rival neighborhood, you don't really want to show up every day. And knowing that there's a group of dudes waiting to stab you or shoot you or stomp you, like our brother Darren Albert in Chicago, the 16-year-old who was killed at Finger High School because he lived in a rival neighborhood. And so I think that's a big part of, you know, what we're talking about as well, that's connected to this exclusion and the market-driven, you know, the shutting down and the land grab, you know, because there's a new land grab, and it's called find you a closed down public school so you can put your charter school in it. And that's, I think, a new phenomenon that we're going to have to eventually address as well.
Well, the practice of making money in public education is, in one hand, laughable, in one hand, utterly devastating, and I think it's in between where people who are doing it we're shocked and stunned, and so people are able to do it. I wanted to do two things. One is for those of you who want to ask questions to maybe line up at the two mics. I mean, maybe we can put that one right here. And I wanted to, as you all are preparing to do that, I wanted to raise an additional question because I think what's been interesting and you know, we've been talking about these micro moments, these exchanges, these events that have stayed with us, the sort of slippages of interactions into violations. And we're also talking about the broad landscape, the large landscape under which and within which and oppressed by which what should be a loving and generative institution is being, and I appreciated what you said, Joseph, that it is being interrupted, but it's also being corrupted. And so one of the promises we made in putting this panel announcement out was that we were going to raise the issues, but we might also raise some glimmers of hope. And all of you are tethered to this conversation in different ways. And I wondered if you could talk about one lever that you would like to push, that you would like to see pushed, that might move or dislodge some of the interwoven, challenging landscape that you have woven for us today.
I think that we've well established that punishment doesn't work. And we've established that because if punishment worked, then when we suspended kids wouldn't get suspended anymore. But they're more likely to get suspended if you suspend them once. And if suspension worked, or exclusion of any kind worked, then it wouldn't make kids more likely to end up dropping out or going to jail. But we also know that it's more likely to do that. So it doesn't work. So it's not a question of whether they're saying it's causing it, it's saying it does not work. So what I think makes a difference is what is happening in small spaces all over the country. And I know there's a high school in New York, and I can't remember the high school in the Bronx, and I can't remember the name right now, but where people are saying, okay, well, we're going to make a point of not using punishment as the way we deal with issues, but we're going to have people, well, I think here care is going to come up again, because have people engage in caring conversations with kids to understand and to, I think this program, or not I think this program is entitled a restorative justice program. So it's, this idea of, sitting down and getting kids to engage in various ways around what it was that happened, acknowledge what they did, and acknowledge who was victimized, or how it may have victimized the school community. But at its core, it's about teaching. It's about using the problems that occur with kids in schools as a teachable moment, rather than essentially giving up on them. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say, considering the outcomes of suspension, dropout, and so forth, and not just in terms of incarceration, but in terms of social exclusion from the fabric of society that are associated with those processes. It's safe to say that when you choose to exclude kids, you're giving up. You're saying, I give up on you. And I think that those spaces, those administrators and teachers that choose to use each moment, each event as an opportunity to teach and understand and find ways to be caring and just, I think that is, for me, where it starts, where it can start to change. For one example, anyway.
Like I see this forum right here as a good start. Even just more of including our youth, our students, in on even helping to develop our curriculums at higher ed. I think they should be at the table. There's no reason that we should have all of these young people walking around, even here at TC. 2 weeks ago, I think some of you all know this, I told some of the students, I was outside and I said, what's up to this young guy? I said, what's up, brother? And he stopped and said, man, I've been going to school over here for 2 years. He's a high school student. And he said, man, you the first person to ever stop and say, what's up to me? And I'm from the South. We say hi to everybody. And, so if I say hi to you, just wave back. But yeah, and I just think that we have to begin to include young people. You know, we talk about them, but we never even give them a chance to talk. Dr. West always says he's famously for saying you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. And I think I told you this. I added something to it, that you can't lead the people if you're not first willing now to sit down and listen to the people.
That's right.
And the very people that we say we love, we're oftentimes we're not listening to them and bringing them in and including them. And I think that also in terms of my work, and I'm working to get the academy to acknowledge that academia is more than journal reviews and peer reviews, that going into communities and doing workshops that I do on the side when I'm not here studying, which is a lot, that's work too, that's academic work as well. Because I'm on the ground, even though I'm a doctoral student here, on days, I oftentimes go to schools and do workshops with students and do motivational speaking or talk about my books with them. And I think we have to broaden our concept of what real, true academic work is and make education cool to kids. Because when they see me come in and I rap for them, they like, whoa, you rap and you're a doctoral student? Like, yeah, like you can be both. You don't have to choose. And oftentimes we try to make them choose. You either got to be this over here or you got to be that. Why can't you be both? Why can't, because this is their culture. And we're saying that it's about cultural diversity and culturally responsive and relevant education, but does that also include, because there's more to music than a person's culture, does that also include spirituality? Because we don't talk about that a lot at the academy. We don't talk about kids' spiritual lives. I've never heard the word God, Jesus, Jehovah in any of my classes so far. But God is how I made it through the tough times that I went through. And can I not include that into how I made it in the classroom? And I've seen lately that that's been kind of shut down. We don't want to talk about that, but that's how I made it through. You know, and that's how, and that's the community that many of the kids are living in. There's still a spiritual foundation that somebody in their family is praying for them. Someone in their family is going to church, and that has influence on them. But if we ask them to come into the classroom, but you got to leave all of these things that make you, leave your culture, your spirituality, your family, and everything that makes you who you are, check that at the door. But you come in empty shell and let me teach you my values. Let me teach you how I was taught, because I have a good education, and you can get one too. If that's how we approach it with this paternalistic approach to education, as if we know more than the parents do, when they spend all this time with them, as if they don't love their children like our parents loved us. The kids in the hood, their parents love them just as much. Actually, probably more, oftentimes, because of what they have to endure. And that's a lot of love when you're bailing your kid out of jail and you're going out trying to hustle to feed them. Or every day you have to worry about them coming home in a body bag. That's a lot of love for a mother or a father to give to a child. And if we can't embrace that, embrace the family as a whole, I don't think we're going to get far. But if we can, then I think we're going to move leaps and bounds from where we're at. And I think so embracing our young people, but also embracing the family, that which makes them who they are, totally. If we have to make phone calls, because I'll make phone calls. I call home, and not just when the kid is in trouble. Sometimes just to eat with the parents. And so they can get to know me, because I want to create real community. I don't want to just talk about it. I want to create real community with my kids. And so I'll eat dinner with them, or I'll have dinner and invite parents up to my classroom. And we sit down and we eat and we talk. And we don't even talk about all the trouble that little John's been in. We talk about football and basketball and what's going on in the community, because we're trying to build rapport. Because remember, oftentimes, especially when you're working in impoverished neighborhoods, you're working with parents who they've had bad experiences with school themselves. And so to them, school is a very uncomfortable place because this brings back memories of what happened to me, and I don't like this place. And so they shut down. And oftentimes they are very distant from the teachers that are in there because they don't feel like those people, because those people remind them of the people who they had problems with. And so we have to begin to break those walls down as administrators, as educators, break those walls down. And if that means removing ourselves from those walls and going out into their community on their terms, in their turf, proving that, you know what, we're gully enough, for that translation, we're brave enough. And we care enough to come to you and to talk to you. And so now they feel comfortable. So now when we do have a problem with the kid, we have a relationship with the parents, with the guardians, or with the community leaders. You know, and so I think moving to a more community-focused, community-based solutions and way of doing things, kind of getting back to that, I think that that's going to be a major plus for even for the academy.
And land is the context. The question is in the context of land. Land is our political and economic basis for all power. Period. And we find here in this citadel of urban community called Harlem, we have been the lab and the rat of all social sciences. The land here, just like everywhere else in the United States, controls our property, our ability to govern our own schools, prisons, and to a large degree, it sets up the academic and intellectual environment for at least public education. Now, a question to the panel is, and I have answers, but I just want to hear you speak on it, is how is it that even our educators that have a significant voice throughout the United States realize this, yet in environments like this, they continue to support and re-elect elected officials that enable gentrification, enable our schools to be eroded by officials that they support, and that they continue to, on the other end, claim that there's a problem, don't know why it exists. I'm putting it out there because these are the realities. And in closing, before you answer it, also understand that throughout this country, where you have the urban communities, for too long you've had civil rights leaders sitting in offices for years, watching our communities go down the drain, controlling the economic and political environment, and particularly allowing and perpetrating the gentrification of cultural communities that ultimately affect the ability to govern the education of our children. So that's a broad context, but I'd like you to speak on it because this has, in this community, has been a lab and a rat of too many social sciences. Thank you.
So maybe we can take a couple
That's
of
a powerful
responses.
question. Powerful question. I mean, I think that it has much to do with the fact that, as I mentioned before, in the last 35 years or so, let's say with the death of Martin, let's go back to '68. We know that when Martin was shot, something deeply died in the hearts of most people of goodwill, and especially black folk. There was a sense of black collective defeat, even given the movements that he and so many others were part of. So we consciousness shifted to I consciousness. It's just about me and mine. So instead of talking about lift as you climb, the way Dorothy Height, the great Dorothy Height talked about it in the National Council of Negro Women, or service to others, it was what can I get for me more and more. Not everybody, but that became more dominant. And as our leadership shifted into a political system that's based very much on interest groups concerned about access to money, power, rather than talk about justice, they went with the dominant tendencies. And the dominant tendencies the last 30 years has been big money. Gentrification is nothing but the privatizing of land in order to gain big profits, and other values are secondary. What about the children? Remember what Ronald Reagan said in 1981 when he said, are you going to deregulate television? When I was growing up, they regulated television between 2 o'clock and 8 o'clock. It's Felix the Cat and a few other shows for you. Well, what are you going to do about the children, Mr. Reagan? The market will take care of the children. That's what they said in 1981. That's what we got. What happens when market takes care of children? Children become bundles of pleasure to be manipulated by corporations so that they become consumers, and they are targeted more and more in our advertising. Now they're deeply sexualized because that's where most of the money is, on the internet and so forth, you see. So that what has happened is our leaders get tied into that tendency, and then so many of our leaders are characterized by legalized bribery and normalized corruption because they need money in order to win the next election. They respond to big money with lobbyists. And so you talk about justice and common good, and, oh, that's very nice, Fest West. That sounds good in the university, but I got to survive. So I better go back to this big lobbyist. They got big. What about poor folk? They broke the 10 Commandments financially. They don't have a lot of money. I don't listen to them unless they constitute a threat. See, if poor folks start acting up, then everybody gets nervous, and they have town hall meetings on television and so forth and so on. But other than that, let them suffer invisibly. Keep them pacified. Give them that Ritalin. Nothing but speed. Give them that fast food. Let their bodies feed on themselves. Keep them obese. 1990, 17% of the kids obese. What is it today? Unregulated markets. Feed them anything. Just keep them quiet. Don't let them talk about justice. Don't let them be on fire concerned about each other. And the ones that are, attack them. Demonize them. Say, you outdated. You out in the 1960s. Time for you to grow up and get hip with the crowd. What is the crowd? Big money. No, that's sick stuff. That's what Grandmama said. Right? That's spiritually empty. Grandmama's right. You end up with a whole wave of generations and politicians driven by big money, no matter what color they are. Governors, mayors, presidents of dear brother Obama. Oh, he bailed out the banks, didn't he? Did he bail out homeowners? No. What has he said about the new Jim Crow? Mr. President, you're a black man. It destroyed 2 generations. Your system is failing when it comes to young people. Your educational system is failing. Now, who says that on TV? Some of us do, but we don't stay on too long. But it's the truth, because in America, we always want to assume America knows best. No, you don't, because you're failing here. You do best. No, you don't. You're failing here. Go look at what's happening on Rikers Island. Go look at Attica. Go look at so forth. That's failure. What you're going to do, you're supposed to be experimental, improvisational, open to critical examination, but you keep doing the same thing, and you keep generating more failure. When you're going to change? What politician do you know talks that way? There's a few. Every once in a while, Bernie Sanders, Maxine Waters, very few. Very few, because the big money is so influential in where our politicians are, what they do. You see? So the truth becomes more and more buried in the ground. The truth crushed earth rises again. Sooner or later, you're going to come to terms with it. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. That suffering is going to hunt you down. Sooner or later, it's going to come at you. You see? So the point you're making is a crucial one. But we just need everyday folk to be willing to speak the truth, bear witness, and live. And for some of us, we'll have to die.
I'm going to do something very odd and push back on something you said.
Sure. No, that's good. That's good, though. That's good.
Just very slight in the sense of Rikers Island and Attica representing the system's failure. This is earlier on, before you got here. I was trying to figure out whether what was happening around exclusion in schools represented a positive or negative feedback loop, in the sense that negative feedback loops create sort of stability in the system. Right. And the system focused on sort of the markets and a market system requiring some hierarchy, stratification. And I think one of the things that this system also requires is that some who push back against how we try to normalize in the sense of you need to sort of develop into a consumer, a proper consumer. And there are various ways people can push back at that or on that, but I think that one of the ways that in schools, clearly, we deal with pushback that comes in many forms from kids is to exclude. And thinking about our discussion of how that exclusion then can lead to incarceration. Incarceration then represents success in that system. It represents maintaining stability within that system because those are the ones who don't fit. They're trying to disrupt the system. And so we need to remove those of us who, take our jobs at Teachers College and we're okay. We're the consumers. We're playing by the rules. We're normal. And which is really making me evaluate. Yeah, so I think.
But you see my point, though. It's successful within an unjust system.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh no, well, we agree then.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh yeah, no, we agree. I don't want that success. No. I want to be a misfit for that system.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
Go ahead, yeah.
Good evening. First of all, I want to say thank you for all the panel guests, Dr. West and so on. Dr. West, your first book that I read was about capitalism, and it really gave me some insight on what was going on in imperialist capitalism and things like that. But before I get into my question, I wanted to tell you guys a little something about Joseph Mathews. I'm originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and raised in a small town 30 minutes outside of Tulsa. And me and Joe met as freshmen at the #1 junior college in Oklahoma. Now, the significance of that was we were both there because we didn't pass our ACT and our grade point average were horrible. So to say
we were football players. He said the #1. So it was the #1 football team, not the #1 academic school.
So a lot of the things that he talked about as far as an African-American young black male going through some of the things, I can attest to that. I experienced that. But going back to my question is you alluded to something that I was going to ask when you talked about, when are we going to, if we're going to help children, why don't we ask them what they need first? And so one of the things the word that I always use is the motivation. I've been an educator for 7 years. All of my career, I've educated urban youth. But for example, I can think about my high school that I was with. We had a magnet school that was a business management journalism school. Now, the numbers of my students were probably 65% African American, and the rest were Latino and Hispanic. But the main businesses and the different things that they were bringing in was a company called Cox Cable. Now, how does Cox Cable motivate kids of that origin? And so one of the things that I start, and my question to you guys is, how do we get the motivation put past to the policymakers? Because when I say motivation, obviously there was some motivation that allowed Joseph to further his education. There was some motivation that allowed me, because I am in the interdisciplinary graduate school program here at TC, that allowed me to motivate myself to be able to be at this level, at this institution. They say that Teachers College is the Ivy League, the cream of the crop. But years ago, me and Joe both didn't pass our ACT or SAT on this level in New York. We didn't have the grade point average. So my question is, what are some of the things that we can do to hone into? And Dr. West, you talked about the arts, extracurricular. I've did a lot of research on extracurricular activities. I'm a health ed and family and community. And so what the research says is that that does increase academic performance. The research is there. They know it's the truth. So my question is, what is the motivation? How can we put that in a way that policymakers, that race to the top, I don't know what that is. That means race to the bottom to me. But race to the top and all of these other things that we have, how can we push the motivation and find out that kids that are in low socioeconomic neighborhoods or areas or people that are performing low, how can we get that motivation factor and make sure that the curriculums are connected to what those kids are? Because sports was for me, but if I didn't make it in sports, if I didn't play football, if I didn't play basketball, there are a lot of people that are in the sports industry that's making a lot of money. So that's my question. How can we push the motivation factor of the kids? Because if there's no motivation, then they can't be successful anyway.
I'll take a stab at that, and thank you for the question. This is my best friend. We met, and we're both Aries too. So, and we're both from Oklahoma, and we were both running backs in college. And but I was more of the outgoing Aries, and he was the laid back Aries, and so he watched me get in trouble a lot. And we both journeyed here together. That's another part about, like, even just in terms of partnership and friendship and having a bond. It's hard for a kid to drop out of school if he has other peers to be accountable to, because they will call him and say, yo, man, where you at? I didn't see you at school today. Like that, I did that with a school where I had 10 kids who were at the highest risk of dropping out, and they all had each other's telephone numbers, and each week they checked in with each other, and they made it through the whole school year. And they were at the 10 lowest grades in the school. They made it through the school year because they were all calling each other. And if I don't see you today, I'm gonna call you and find out where you at. And so I think that there's something really important about peer support that we have to begin to address. We'll talk about that at another forum. But one of the things that I think is really important in terms of the motivation, I think that's really, because for me personally, one of the other reasons that I dropped out of school because the work that I was doing was not relevant to the world in which I was living in. And so they're telling me that, Doc, I know you are a philosopher, and I love philosophy. You made me love philosophy, taking your class. But when I was 17, and bullets were flying, and I was hungry, and we were living in utter poverty, I did not want the teacher talking to me about Shakespeare. Because this was, to me, I'm getting in trouble because you're mythology, things that are not real, and bullets flying over my head and not having food to eat, that's real to me. And you need to talk to me about something that's gonna put money in my pocket that I can touch and feel and smell. Because if you're not talking about that, then I'm not feeling that. Because Shakespeare is not gonna make me any money. This dude is dead. And Kafka and all of these, Dante, all these people, I don't know them. And I know Pookie down the street, and he's got a fat wad of money. And he sells drugs to get it. So how can I get what he's got? And I would talk, when I became a teacher and I was teaching life skills, I would ask the students, what if I could show you how to get that car that you look at and you don't have to dunk a basketball to do it? What about if I showed you, like, the people who set up Jay-Z's concert, his manager, his lawyer, and so when we're talking about career relevance, making school relevant by showing actually like, oh, here's a new concept. Remember back in the day when they used to have like Votech? Like that's like, and people talked about that, like that was a bad thing. And you were like considered on the low end of society if you were talking about Votech. But like reintroducing careers to our students and in our education system and teaching them like, man, you can go to school like your passion, you can pursue your passion. One of my kids, Daryl, he wouldn't do his work. And all he did was just sit around and watch videos. And I talked to his mom, and she said all he does is watch videos. And so I went and got all of the material from the local college about video production. And it changed his life. And he ended up, you know, because now the work that he's doing, it's relevant. And it matters. Because in order for me to get here and do this video production, I asked him, do you want to be the person watching the videos, or do you want to be the one creating the videos? Because you can get paid. You can be ordering Jay-Z and all those video girls that you're looking at. They're going to be jocking you, man, to get in the video. He said, for real? Me? I'm like, yeah, you can do that if you go to college and major in this. He didn't even know that he could go to college and major in that. And when I introduced that to him, now English and science makes it matters. Sitting down when the teacher tells you to sit down and doing it the first time, it matters now. And he ended up going to college. And he went into video production, and he's working out in Houston now. You know, and this was a special education student who was uninspired, unmotivated, and it changed his life. And so, yeah, so to answer Darren's question, definitely introducing, the motivation is introducing the things that they love already to them and using education as a tool to get there.
Word in defense of Shakespeare. My dear brother, and I know we're going to ask your question, that you get such a profound critique of the love of money and the love of power in the name of decency and integrity in Shakespeare. There's a lot of arrows. You say what? Yes. Life lessons, insight, wisdom. This is true in the biblical literature. What you said about Shakespeare, true for Hebrew scripture. It's true for Toni Morrison's novels. What kind of person are you going to be when you're working in the video industry? Shakespeare has you wrestling with those questions. Jesus does too. Amos does too. Toni Morrison does too. Curtis Mayfield does too. KRS-One does too. What kind of person you're going to be? See what I mean? Now that, in that sense, is not going to be an immediate translation. It's going to be a humanistic education about what it means to be human. Dante does too, and so forth and so on. So that's my little response to that, even though I hear what you're saying. Go right ahead.
Well, how y'all doing? It's kind of short. My name is Tim Rolak, and right now I just want to definitely say I feel blessed to be here. You know, I'm like in a new world. I'm recently a case manager. I'm here with my coworker Monique, and we work at a pre-GED program on 98th Street in Union Settlement. And I want to. I have a two-part question, and I want to go off of Brother Mathews when he used the word accountability, which is very important, and also relevance. I go through that every day with our young guys. The question is, how can a new school structure that doesn't necessarily follow the Department of Education standards solve certain issues like dropouts and test scores, survive and remain longevity, and also, how can a youth like myself can persuade another youth who values materialistic items rather than their education?
Okay, I definitely think, and I appreciate both of those questions. Definitely on the first one, you know, like we were talking about, using, you know, for me, it's always been about accountability. Like I said, it's hard to drop out when we create family and community. That means that we're not going to let the other person fall. And I got your back, and you feel comfortable, and there's a space that's created for you to come and talk to me about the problems that you're facing here at school, at home, in your community. And so I think that part of it remains true. And also, you said this is a new school?
Well, for the question or the school, the program that I work in?
The program.
Oh, no. We've been around for what 5 years now, Moni? Yeah, 5 years.
5 years. Okay. And so you asked, the second question that you asked was?
The second question was, it's definitely more of a personal, is how can a youth like myself persuade another youth who values more materialistic things like, clothes, money especially, rather than their education?
Yeah, one of the things that I remember doing when I was a youth or younger youth, I'm not an old man yet like Dr. West is.
Appreciate that.
No, but for me, I would always talk to my friends, and even for myself when I made the transformation, it had to be bigger than you, bigger than myself. And I would talk to them like, man, you have little nephews, nieces, and cousins, and brothers and sisters. Who are they going to aspire to be? Like, do they look up to you? And they would always say, yeah, they look up to me, man. Like, oh, what are you doing? Are you doing something that's going to lead them to jail? Are you going to do something that's leading them to college or, to being better human beings? And oftentimes they say, oh, man, I do what I do, but, but they can't do it. Like, no, they don't do what you tell them to do. They do what you show them. They do what they see you doing. And so ultimately, for you, one of the things that I think I would do is definitely show them with your work. Show them with your work. But be open at the same time. Transparent, because oftentimes as educators and practitioners, we're this over here in our career, but then our personal life and who we actually are, we don't ever show the kids. I have a coworker I had a coworker, he was a rapper and a science teacher, and the kids could not stand him because they didn't even know he was a rapper. And I was like, yo, man, because I went to a show, he was really good. And I'm like, man, why don't you ever rap for the kids? So if you think about Chris Edmond, he was the opposite of Chris Edmond. But he was a scientist. And he would not rap for the kids. And I'm like, man, peel back some of the layers and show your kids that you, too, are a human being. You have flaws, but you also have these passions. And that life is not just about money. It's also about, man, what do you love to do? Because if you really talk to the kids, they're going to tell you, like, there's other things that, like, and I'll say this, use that passion that they have, because everything is about money, but there's something that they love to do. And if they can find that passion, and you can point them like, okay, these are the steps to get here, and you can make some money. Do you want to make money where you're looking over your back and wondering if the police or one of your homeboys are gonna jam you up, or do you want to make money legally so you can sleep at night and you can breathe easy and you can have a family and a home? So there's nothing wrong with making money. It shouldn't be all of who you are. Just like there's nothing, I do a lot of things, but that's not all of who. It means a lot to me, but it's not all what I have to offer this world. It's not all of who I am. And so I think that definitely showing the kids that, you know what, this is your passion right here, finding that passion, and guiding them in that direction of like, okay, like take the steps to get here. And on the way, you can make money, but you also can make peace with yourself. You can help your family. You can inspire your younger brothers, sisters, cousins, nieces. And because we want to see them make money too. We don't want you to make all the money, but then your little brother, he goes to jail because he was trying to be like you. Share with him. Have them get out and do work in the community. Help, because they say they love it. I always talk to the kids, you say you love the hood so much, what are you doing to help it? If you love it, then why are you're not loving it because you're taking from it. You're taking from the hood. You're not giving anything back because the selling drugs, that's not giving anything back. Not going to school and not getting your education, that's not giving anything back. because you're not putting yourself in position to be a leader to come back and give to the community. But you say you love the hood. You say you love the people that you represent. No, you don't. You love yourself. And you actually don't even love yourself because you don't even know who you are. You know, so introducing them to who they are, you know, and finding that passion, but sitting down, talking with them. And I would love to talk with you more even afterwards, because that's the type of work that I do. And it sounds like that's a project that is going to, you know, over a duration of time. So I would love to sit down and we could work something out where we could do some ongoing, maybe some programs together. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Appreciate that. Appreciate that.
Well, since the women haven't gotten up yet. My name is Ms. Plummer, and I am a school social worker as well as a guidance counselor at Mount Hall High School. And we are a small school. Mr. Mathews came to our school, and the first time I don't think he was embraced like he was, but he came back again. And my principal said, this is the person I want you to talk to. And so I welcome that partnership. However, I also think that a lot of things that the students that I see as a social worker and as a clinician is that they need a sense of belonging. If they don't have a sense of belonging, they often get tossed and turned by a teacher who they think don't like them, or maybe a principal who's too strong, or social worker who's too compassionate. And it's got to be a blending of that sense of family, as you said, and I agree, and I applaud everything that's being said. But I see the tears, I see the pain, I stay late, I come in early, I'll do a home visit. It would be nothing for me to go back to the grassroots, because I think that's what made us who we are as a school and a community, is connecting all of those missing components. If dad wasn't there, then somebody else became a dad, or if mom wasn't there, somebody else became a mom. And I try to instill into the students that I work with, whether they're general ed, and I work with the special needs population, and I tell them, if you don't have a place to go to, why are you in the school? Is there somebody that we can reach to say, I'm available? So the heart of what students need when they're trying to get that education is to understand that we are all in need of giving or receiving something. And I think my principal sees that by telling us that we've got to know that the kids are not here for us, we are there for the kids. And as long as we can see that one kid who is ready to drop out, and you set down your books and you take that kid to a social worker or to somebody they trust, and to bring in someone like Mr. Mathews and say, listen, this is what we're struggling with. Let's get them connected and get them with a sense of autonomy to say it's okay where you are. I've been there. And I think it's got to go back to where we can make that connection, and it's not just about a teacher coming from the suburbs to teach someone in Harlem, but it's about us reaching and accepting and adapting everything we're doing to help our students. And I really more say I applaud, but it has motivated me to say as a community leader as well, I cannot stand to see a student who don't believe in themselves. I cannot stand to see a teacher who will come in and teach and say they're not teachable. And that's what gets me going. And I just want to say that we need more of this in our school. Panelists to come and talk in our schools, because our kids need to hear somebody cares and that love. And so it's more of just saying thank you, and thanking Mr. Mathews for being a part of our Mount Hall School program, because it is making a difference.
We need to bring it together to kind of build that momentum where something significant changes versus all these little factors and factions everywhere doing little things on their own. So how do we create that momentum, that space for that movement that we need to turn things around? Because the youth are saying it, we are saying it, the educators are saying it, even the people spending the money are saying it. So how do we take all this energy together and create that space where we can have that significant change? Thank you.
That's a $64,000 question. It really is. And I don't think that one just deliberately designs it. I think that there's forces that are greater than us that are at work in history, in society, You just have to make sure that when the moment comes, you have enough people of decency and integrity who can move and speak in such a way that they're willing to keep alive the best of the past. So it's love and justice rather than hatred and revenge and so forth. But we just don't know. Nobody thought that Rosa Parks sitting down on the bus was going to generate a major catalyst for a freedom movement. But when it happened, the folk were ready. They were prepared. And the folk who were ready and prepared stepped in with dignity and integrity. They didn't step in with hatred and revenge. They had readied themselves spiritually, morally, politically, and so forth. And what we need to do is ready ourselves, scholarly modes, spiritual modes, political modes, when the moment occurs. Some people thought maybe it was Occupy. We just don't know. We don't know. Hadia Pendleton in Chicago, shot. All of a sudden now in Chicago, major, just on the phone with Brother Lupe, fiasco, trying to shut down the city of Chicago, 2 weeks, 31 high schools. They hadn't had organizing among 31 high schools in Southside Chicago since the 1960s. You all remember Hadia Pendleton, the sister who was shot? It was her death that catalyzed that kind of coming together, brought the trade union and the young people together. That's rare. Where will it go? We don't know. So we just don't know when. We just have to continually invoke the memory. Because one of the worst things among our younger generation, given the market culture, is there's no memory. There's no concern about what the old folk went through and what grandmama sacrificed and granddad tried to teach. Not because they have monopoly on truth, but keeping track of the best of them. You see? Connecting, that's what the Sankofa bird is all about. Refusing to go forward until you first look backward. What went into you to help you sustain the best of who you are, and how will you try to manifest that and pass it on so when that moment occurs, and when we act, because in the end we really are talking about the need for a social movement. There's just no doubt about that. You can't have 1% of the population owning 42% of the wealth and having 22% of your children living in poverty and think you're going to have a high-quality educational system. It's impossible. It's impossible. The only group in the world that has better high-quality education than Finland is the top 1% in America. The top 1% of America's kids get the best education in the world. Just introduce poverty, we drop 23. Introduce race, we drop to 23. So that the issues of poverty and so forth are inextricably connected to education, but in the end, the individual choices we make a difference. And hope is sustained by the individual choices we make, given the context that we find ourselves. But none of us choose our context. Historical context is in place. We can change historical context, but we don't choose which one it is. We have to deal with it. And right now, we're dealing with relative failure when it comes to our precious and priceless young people who are poor, and yet many of them still flower and flourish because of their individual creativity, but too many of them fail and end up in the new Jim Crow and other places.
So I want to thank my colleagues for, I think, starting a conversation. 2 hours is clearly not enough. By way of closing, I thought maybe, I sort of offered a bunch of words near the beginning of some of the words that were helping to define the landscape that we're fighting against. And in this last section, it seems like you all put words on the table that maybe allow us to do some kind of dismantling of the pipelines and systems and landscapes we're talking about. So words like preparation and humanity and interruption and listening and memory and justice and an ethic of caring and harmony and love. So thank you very much for talking with us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jolene Lane. I'm Director for Diversity and Community Affairs at Teachers College. And I want to again thank our wonderful panelists and our amazing moderator, who I think has done a fabulous job this evening. Can we give her? I think it was actually last semester, probably November or December, somehow Joseph made his way to our office. And it was really just to have a conversation. We're the Office for Diversity and Community Affairs. He was a relatively new student. He came in to meet us, and we began to engage in conversation about him and his past and his work at TC and the book, particularly The Dropout, the book he had written. And this really came more out of an attempt of us, Janice and I, in our office, trying to be supportive of this doctoral student who was, or I guess he weren't a doctoral student yet, but he was about to be a doctoral student at TC. He was a master's student at the time who had done some good work and tried to figure out a way to help him engage with the community and support his work. And so that really evolved into this more extensive panel. Joseph is a part of that, and we asked other faculty members, and he had a connection to Professor West. And so that was how this came about. So I want to thank him for the idea and thank everyone for participating, because I think it's been a wonderful beginning of a conversation. Secondly, I wanted to offer our panelists a small gift. It's become a tradition that I began when I came to TC, that when we do these great programs, I really try to acknowledge that they've given of their time and expertise and knowledge and wisdom and everything else to make the programs that our office offers so incredibly wonderful and well received. So I will frame the poster and offer one to each of our panelists. So I want to give these gifts to them today. 3 more over there, but I couldn't carry them all. There you go. So thank you very much, all of you, for participating.